Greetings, YouTube. I apologize for the poor lighting, but Mandarin settled in and I don't want to disturb her. And I know how popular she is here on YouTube. And also, pardon the hat, but it may be the day of this filming, April 26th, but it's still raw and chilly here in New Hampshire. So I'm wearing a chamois shirt and a felt fleece hat to keep a chill off. So I actually have a request from someone named Zynock111. I remembered who sent me questions. Aren't you proud of me? And he's starting out as a new GM, and he has concerns about being a new GM. So he's looking for some advice. So I'm going to look at these questions and see if I can answer them. But I'm also looking for advice from you people out there who are not new GMs. What would your advice be for a new GM, regardless of system? Because, you know, good GM advice is good GM advice regardless of what the mechanics you are running. Very rarely do I think advice is so specific to a system that it's not usable in another role-playing system. So he's thinking about the sort of things I'm thinking about are, and he has 3 examples here. The first example is, how do you treat the characters for absent players? And that can be a tough one. It depends on where you end a session. Now, if you can work it to end a session at downtime, that makes the process a whole lot easier. But there have been times when you have to end a session in an action scene. You're like it's a commercial break. The action scene goes up to the break, a week off or 2 weeks off, and the action scene picks up again, just like a TV show. When that happens, an absent player is going to be a major issue, because when you have an action scene going on, regardless of the system, the individual players' decisions are very important. What they're doing in that scene is quite possibly a life or death decision for that character. So the only thing you can do is ask the player, okay, what would you like done with your character in this situation? And the best option would be to have another player take over. So you have a human being making decisions for that character. Hopefully the decisions that would be made or similar to the decisions that would be made by the player themselves. If the player says, okay, I'll just let the GM run them, that's a difficult thing for the GM, because the GM's got all the stuff involved in running the game. They have the whole plot line, they have all the NPCs, the mooks with all the action that, you know, that that GM, he or she could be running a dozen or 2 dozen different characters. So handing them a PC at the same time is difficult. Also, how is the GM going to separate the information they have about the scene from the information the character has? Yeah, there's a conflict of interest there. Does the GM end up looking like he's giving the character he's now playing inside information he shouldn't have, or is the player going to think that he's being prejudiced against this character because the GM wants the NPC mooks and such to win? It's a difficult call. I recommend having someone else in the group run the character. Now, one of the things I always want to have is 2 copies of a character sheet. I have one that the player keeps and one that is a fairly static one that is updated like every level or every time the character changes, depending on how your system runs. It doesn't necessarily have to have every little detail like the hit points and things like that. We can fudge that if you have to. That way, if the player can't show up and didn't plan on not showing up, you have the reference already at hand. Digital copies obviously are the best option for this, because they can be updated quickly and easily. So that's my option about when you don't have a player there. Try to get another player to run their character. That's the best option in my opinion, and try to always have duplicate copies of the character sheets. Even if it's just a thumbnail sketch. Like, I know that when I run a game, I like to have a thumbnail sketch of the character's abilities right in front of me. In fact, I made up a 4-character sheet, because I usually run in 4 to 5 characters in a game. And that would give me a quick reference of things, really pertinent things about each character that I wouldn't have to ask the players, because that way they wouldn't know what I was doing. If I say, hey John, your character's automatically John knows something's up. But if I've got the reference in front of me, I can look at what John's character has. John doesn't know what I have planned. I can be a sneaky GM. Okay, the next thing is, Zynox is asking, is what themes are likely present in the game? That is quite possibly the broadest question I have ever been asked. What themes can be present in the game is big, is really big. I think that when you are creating the campaign, you need to get the players involved. What kind of themes do they want to play? So even though the GM is the one crafting the world, the players should be involved. If the players all want to run, a swashbuckling steampunk game, and the GM wants to run a magical intrigue game where there's never any combat, those are two significantly different themes and storylines. And neither party is going to be happy when each tries to shoehorn the game into the direction they want it to go. So your best bet is to start from the get-go. Tell the players, okay, this is roughly what I'm running. High fantasy, it's going to be set in Forgotten Realms. I'm using the Harp rule system. These races are not allowed. Here's a rough thumbnail of the house rules I'm going to be using. Let's work up together a group that makes sense for this game. I think that's the best method. The GM presents the world in a rough form, a thumbnail, sketch, if you will, and then the players can then create the characters and a group together that makes sense and fits into the game. And there's no surprises that way, or fewer surprises. And if the players have a really strong thing they want to do, they can maybe be able to convince their GM to do it. And if it isn't too far off the mark from what the GM likes to do, maybe the GM appreciates having their creative muscles stretched a bit and will do what the characters want to do. But again, that's an incredibly broad question, and unless you have more specific sub-questions within that, I'm not sure that I can answer it more specifically than that. Cooperation and communication are what's important in this situation, in my opinion. And the last question is things that might offend someone and so on. That's more of a statement. And you have to know your players. Now, if you're starting with a brand new group and you don't really know the people, you should probably take some broad social references. You may want to be careful touching on things such as rape, incest, child molestation. These are hot button issues. Racism, misogyny. These things can push people's buttons. Then there may be specifics. You may discover that someone in the group has a major issue with X, but you don't know that yet. So you may bump into that. But if you know the players, they're friends, and you know what they don't like and that they do like, you can work within those parameters, and you can maybe push the bounds a bit to get an emotional response. But there are lines you don't want to cross if you know that these people will be deeply offended by something. If you know for a fact that one of the players in your group is a survivor of sexual abuse or rape as an adult, you probably want to make sure you make that a major theme in your game, or you use that in a way that is oblique, that is not explicit, that is not throwing it in their face, and make sure that that is always seen as a negative as opposed to someone justifying it, unless it's the bad guy trying to justify it, and of course eventually the bad guy fails and there's then justice in the world, that kind of thing. That's a difficult task to do. Some people could be really bothered by slavery. That could get to them. Some people are going to be bothered by drug use in a game. Some people may be bothered by sexual promiscuity in a game. Some people may be bothered that, say, in the past, many of my games, elves have essentially been pansexual. Their gender and sexual orientations are very fluid, and that can make some people very uncomfortable who have a socially conservative worldview. And while I'm not going to tailor the game completely to in that case, to someone's comfort zone, I am going to make sure I am aware of it if I can. I'm not trying to offend them directly, but I also want to make sure they understand that the world is not necessarily going to conform to their whims, whether it's a fantasy game, science fiction game, or reality. So these are the kinds of things I think you have to touch on when you're dealing with themes that can, or hot button issues that can cause offense, and things like that. And I guess that's pretty much covers what I think you need to be aware of. And again, if you know your players and there are specific issues that would really bother them, be a decent person. Don't be an asshat. Do what you can to make the game fun for everybody. Yes, it's okay to push the limits a little. It's okay to get someone emotionally involved by, getting near something. But don't harp on it. Don't throw it in their faces. Don't dismiss it as unimportant. Be considerate of your players. And if your players are considerate of you and you are considerate of them, everything should go a whole lot more smoothly. So I'm going to ask the YouTube RPG Brigade out there, what advice do you have for a new GM? What advice do you have that you think every new GM should know? And if you have specific points about these things that Zynock has asked about, please feel free to give that information out. I will put these comments in the notes so that you will be able to reference them. I don't expect you to remember them. I am a wordy SOB after all. So I look forward to your comments, and I hope that I have produced something that will be helpful to Zynock.